All right, folks, it's time for our favorite podcast, Cut to the Chase. On this Labor Day weekend, happy Labor Day. I have brought back Matt Hosen, mass tort guru from Quinn Emanuel, to talk about the thing that I keep seeing every time I turn on my computer, which is Camp Lejeune. Ads, posts, forums, discussions. I'm sure everybody here has seen them too. And Matt, how you doing?
I'm great, Greg. How are you? And thanks for having me back on your podcast. I'm sure your viewers are getting sick of seeing me by now.
No, absolutely not. No, they're getting, now they're starting, there's a little flow. Matt was on last week to tell us about the 3M update. It's just, constantly in the news and now the Camp Lejeune. And there's a little bit of a common thread with, people in the military. Listen, you go to the military, your big concern is the enemy. And then you find out, oh my God, the earplugs that they gave us don't work. And the bodies of water that we're sitting here training around are all contaminated. So it's really a sad story. But in any event, you're going to tell us about Camp Lejeune and what's going on with Camp, why it's in the paper, what it's all about. So let's start with the basics. What is Camp Lejeune and where is it? Why is it in the newspapers and the press and the social media?
Sure. So Camp Lejeune was or it still is, it's a military Marine training facility in North Carolina. And it first came about in the 1940s. And so it's been around for a very long time. It's now a superfund site. Now in the 1950s, there started to become some issues with the water that was being used in the camp for, drinking, bathing, everything, the water source around the camp, a lot of well water as well. And what was happening was you had various contaminants contaminating the water, such as various fuels, jet fuel. You had a dry cleaning facility that was leaking chemicals into the water. You had storage tanks, industrial solvents that were leaking into the water, a lot of really bad stuff that can cause catastrophic injuries over time. And so what you had was you have all this contamination happening for decades. Then in the early 80s, at the latest, it started to come on the radar of people in the military, scientists, people responsible for testing the water, there's something wrong with this water. These chemical levels are highly elevated. These are unsafe levels for humans to be drinking. So you had various reports and whatnot that came out in the early 80s, and they were largely ignored. And it was only until several years later in the late 80s that they finally got around to stop using the water in that area, capping the wells. And so what you have is, from the time period between the early 1950s and 1987, you have a lot of people who were exposed to this water that was contaminated with these dangerous chemicals. Now, that includes a lot of, obviously, Marines, other soldiers on the base, also their family members. Also, if a spouse was pregnant at the time that they had exposure to this water. These are all, you also have civilian employees who are working on the base. All of these people who were exposed to this water, decades later now, are having catastrophic medical injuries, many kinds of cancer, liver cancer, kidney cancer, lung cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. You have Parkinson's disease, you have miscarriages, birth defects. All of these types of injuries can all be linked back to this contaminated water. And so, recently in the news, you have, they recently passed an act. It was signed into law just a couple weeks ago. And it's finally the US government coming forward and saying, you know what, there was water contamination, and we are going to finally do the right thing, and we're going to compensate people who were affected by this contamination. And it took a very long time to get here. There's a gentleman by the name of Edward Bell, who was, one of the leaders who he knew, he found out about, he's a lawyer. He found out about this over a decade ago, and he's been trying to get this, to get veterans and other people compensated for their injuries on this for a very long time. There actually was another mass tort litigation that started in the late 2000s. And unfortunately, that MDL was ultimately dismissed because of North Carolina's statute of repose laws. And so in response to, those plaintiffs not being able to get compensation in that prior mass tort that was brought, Congress finally did the right thing. They passed this piece of legislation after a lot of drama that you might have seen in the news about getting this thing passed. It was finally passed and signed into law. And now veterans and other people who were exposed to this water and suffered injury or death in many cases, they are finally getting the chance to get compensation.
All right, so I want to take this piece by piece. Statute of repose, earlier litigation. A lot of people hear about statute of limitation. They understand that if you wait too long, you can't file a lawsuit. How is the statute of repose sort of the same concept as the statute of limitations?
In a way, but the statute of repose deals more with when did you use the product, right? So it's like if you use the product within the past 10 years, maybe 10 years is the statute of repose period for that. So if you wait until 11 years after you use the product, you might be out of luck depending on the law of the state. Statute of limitations, sometimes it can be the same, but it's usually like when the cause accrues, when you should have known of the cause, that's when the statute of limitations typically starts. But sorry, let me just turn off the sound on my computer. But under statute of repose, it's state by state, it varies by state, but some states it can be pretty strict, and it's like it doesn't matter when you could have figured out the cause of your problems. If you waited too long after you use the product, then you can't get compensation for it.
All right, so the earlier litigation that got dismissed because of the statute of repose, let's just say you were one of those individuals that was involved in that litigation. Are you SOL? Can you do anything now, or are your legal rights extinguished?
No, they aren't. No, they aren't. So if depending on if you were a part of that prior MDL, I think there were several thousand individuals who were. You're still fine for seeking. You're still eligible to receive compensation under this new law that was passed because Congress created a new cause of action in there through the passage of this legislation. So you are still entitled to file a claim under this new cause of action.
All right. So the new cause of action, you're entitled to file a claim. How does one do that? How do you become eligible? And do you have to file a lawsuit? Do you hire a lawyer? Is this like an insurance claim? What's the basics on how to secure your compensation?
Sure. So look, the legislation was just passed a couple of weeks ago, and all of the details have not been ironed out yet. But at this point, if you go to the Navy JAG website, there is a form that you can fill out, and it's only a couple of pages long, and that's kind of the first step to get this moving. Now, I say that it's a simple form, but I do highly recommend that you hire an attorney to help you fill out this form because you need to make sure it's filled out correctly, and you don't want to hurt the amount of compensation that you're going to get by filling it out incorrectly. And so I do recommend I don't recommend doing it yourself because you might be, you're not going to, you might not get as good a result as you could if you hired a lawyer to do it. But yes, so at this point, the process is you would submit a claim to, there are instructions on the Navy JAG website. You fill out a form, you submit the claim. Now, later on, likely you're going to need to submit some medical records, proving that you're injured, of course. And so that is, to the extent that you can start gathering those and getting those ready, that would be good. You don't need them right away, but, at this point, they haven't, the Navy JAG hasn't come out and said, this is what we're going to do once we get the claim forms. So the whole process is not clear right now, but it's very likely that you're going to need your medical records, as many as you can get, in order to, kind of justify to JAG, here's how much I should be owed in compensation.
All right. And so you got a time period of almost 4 decades where people were either getting trained on the base near Camp Lejeune, or, their family members, or just people that were around there. How did these people get injured? Did they have to drink the water? Could they have swam in the water? If they walk by the water, what's the mechanism of injury that we understand to be?
I think it's really, there's so many really bad conditions and diseases that are caused by these chemicals that, yes, obviously, if you ingested the water, if you drank the water in any way, that's obviously going to qualify. If you swam in the water, that's probably going to qualify too. It really depends on what disease you have and how much exposure you had. But, I do think it's very telling in the Camp Lejeune Justice Act that was just passed a couple of weeks ago. The time period that we're looking at for exposure is between 1953 and 1987. And the act only requires that you have exposure for 30 days in that over 30-year period. So, if you think of it that way, it's like, you're only exposed to this water for 30 days, and yet you still can be entitled to compensation under this claim. It just shows how devastating, this contaminated water, the devastating effects it can have on your health decades later. And, a lot of these folks who, have suffered from these conditions that I already listed earlier, and many others, it's like you might drink from a certain water supply for a couple months, and then decades later, you get this horrible disease, and you can't link the two. There's no possible way you could have linked those two things. So up until, it becomes public knowledge that, oh, you were drinking from very bad water at the time, or you were, showering or bathing or swimming in the water. So, but going back to your question, I think it does depend on the illness and disease that the person has. And so there is scientific literature out there that kind of studies the link between, if you drink this much water, or, if you're exposed to water in this way, here's the type of disease that you might get. So it's going to be kind of a case-by-case basis.
Okay, so it sounds like you're not going to be going to court. You're just going to be going through some claims process where you have to prove you're eligible, then you get compensated based upon how much of an injury you have.
Well, so yes, there is definitely a claims process. And as part of the Camp Lejeune Act, in order to bring a lawsuit, you need to go through the claims process. Now, the thing is, though, the Camp Lejeune Act that was just passed, it also contemplates, bringing lawsuits in the District Court of North Carolina, the Eastern District of North Carolina. There's a provision in there that says basically you need to go through the claims process. Once you've been through the claims process, you can bring this suit. in the Eastern District of North Carolina. So, you know, as you can imagine, there are potentially hundreds of thousands of people who could have been affected by this water over such a long time period. And so the government is going to have a lot of claims coming in. And, you know, once they get the claim, they're going to evaluate it, and then they're going to make an offer to, you know, they're going to make an individualized offer to whoever made the claim, right? So you can imagine that out of these potentially hundreds of thousands of people, some people are not going to like the offer that they receive. They're going to think it's too low. And in that circumstance, you know, they have the option of filing a lawsuit in the Eastern District of North Carolina. And so I think, yeah, at some point there are going to be lawsuits about this.
Has the act identified the different levels of compensation that will be available, or is this being worked out?
Yeah, so that's not set forth in the act. It's all very general. The act itself, if you know, anyone can go read it. It's maybe 2 pages long. It's not a very detailed act. So yeah, we don't have any kind of like matrix or anything we can use at this point to kind of give a really good, like, firm estimation of the compensation that someone's entitled to. I mean, we can look at other similar things that have happened in the past, but I think there needs to be, we haven't gotten any like early settlement offers from the government at this point, to my knowledge, because it's, you know, it's a very new piece of legislation. But I think, you know, in the coming months, we will get a better idea of kind of the value of these claims that are coming out, at least in terms of, you know, what the government is offering us.
All right, so it's a 2-page act. I am going to put the act on the show notes in case anybody is interested in reading it. Has the so they must, the government and this is the federal government we're talking about, not
Yes.
the state of North Carolina, must
Correct.
have some idea how many people have been injured or died because of this.
I would think so, but I mean, it can be tricky just because, you know, obviously they probably know how many Marines were on that base, but, you know, family members, children who weren't even born at the time, you know, it's a pretty expansive group.
Yeah. And, you know, some of the audience here, you know, sophisticated litigants, or, you know, maybe even attorneys, and they hear claims against the government. Oh, it's going to be capped. It's $100,000 cap, or is there any cap on this?
Not to my knowledge.
So yeah, we don't have to deal with that. And for the lawyers that are negotiating their attorney's fees, they're not being restricted in terms of what they're able to get.
Well, under the terms of the act, there is a provision in the act, I believe, that caps attorney's fees if the claim is, if the suit is resolved in the claim process, meaning they don't have to file a lawsuit afterwards. The person just you know, accepts the offer from the government. I believe the cap is 20% according to the act itself. But then, you know, if it goes to litigation, if it goes to the Eastern District of North Carolina, then I think it would just be, you know, the typical, you know, standard rate for contingency fee.
All right. So just, you know, for the audience out there, you know, there's various cancers that you could have, you know, that you could have because of this water contamination. Maybe it was a close relative of yours actually died because of it. So though the decedents, which of the relatives would qualify for compensation? It's not, I don't think it's all the relatives, you know, there's not like
Right.
a cousin or whatever.
Definitely the spouse. If you were the spouse of someone who died, you know, from one of these diseases, you qualify. I'm actually pulling up the list right now. It's all in the act.
Yeah.
But no, I didn't memorize it. But yes, certain, you know, close relatives of the person who died can bring a claim on their behalf,
All right,
including their spouse.
including the spouse, and that's typically who it would be. But you know, if you're a child, you know, and this is why you got to call lawyers. You know, a lot of
Mhm.
people like to hate lawyers. Oh, I can do it on my own. I'm smart. You know, I had a lawyer once before and they screwed my case up. Don't be a fool, okay? You know, you want to get maximum compensation. You want to get adequate compensation. Don't think you can do this on your own because you mess it up, and you know the lawyers really can't. Once you mess it up, you know that's it. You know, many cases the lawyers can't come and rectify the problem that you caused by foolishly doing it on your own. All right, so now my last question to you is going to be: all right, you're out at Camp Lejeune for a month. You know, how long was it before these injuries or these diseases would manifest themselves? Are we talking like a month, a year, 10 years, 20 years?
It's really, I believe it's really disease specific, you know. But I do think for the most part, you know, what we've seen in other mass torts involving, you know, contaminated water, it can often take many years um, for these things to become noticeable to a person. So, you know, but again, I mean, it is kind of illness by illness. It's going to make a difference.
Okay. And you know I said last question, but you know, there's always that follow-up question that's not really considered a last question. It just kind of popped into my head. I know there's a lot of discussion about water contamination, forever chemicals. Is this part of that type of water contamination? Are we talking about a different type of water contamination?
Yeah, so these are different. The one that you were just mentioned, that's PFAS. Another litigation that's involving our good friend 3M. But yeah, these are different kinds of chemicals. These are chemicals like TCE, PCE, benzene. But those are, I mean, those are kind of the ones that are out front, but then there are also many other chemicals that were also included in this water. So it, you know, they can cause a lot of different kind of illnesses, unfortunately. And they were just dumping, you had leakage from, you know, also landfills, like leakage, like who knows what goes in a landfill. That was leaking into the water supply. People were drinking that as well. So it's really, the chemicals were all over the place.
All right, and this will definitely be the last question. Superfund, you said the Camp Lejeune has been designated a superfund. So is it being cleaned up? Who's cleaning it up? Do you know anything about that? What's the status of Camp Lejeune?
Yeah, I'm not too close on that issue. I don't know what the status is now, but I do know it was declared a Superfund site in 1989. Okay, so after, you know, after the camp decided, or the military decided, okay, we're actually going to shut down, you know, we're not going to allow people to drink the water anymore on this camp. They declared it a Superfund site shortly after that, but I don't know the current status of like the operational status of the camp.
Okay, all right, so I'm assuming that you and your law firm are taking these claims in these cases. You're accepting.
Yes.
All right,
Yes.
so anything else? Did I miss anything that you want to say about this? Anything significant that the audience should probably know about?
No, I think we covered it. I would just say, you know, there's a 2-year statute of limitations that has started to tick on this lawsuit, on your claim now, because that's the statute of limitations that was contained in the act itself. And 2 years is not a very long time. So if you think that you are, you know, possibly entitled to compensation under this bill, you should get on that and reach out to a lawyer as soon as you can, so that we can, you know, get your claims processed and hopefully get you a good amount of money for this.
All right, so if you were a loved one, you know, suffered some crazy illness, cancer, you know, your pregnancy didn't go good, you were at Camp Lejeune, I don't care if it was 30 years ago, give Matt Hosen a call. Don't wait. Don't like to say, I'm going to do it on my own. Let me get my medical records. 2 years goes by, you might drop the ball, you might forget. So do it now. Call him now. All right. And that'll be it for this episode of Cut to the Chase. Matt, thank you for coming on, and enjoy your Labor Day weekend.
Thank you very much for having me again, Greg. And yes, enjoy your Labor Day weekend.
All right. We love you coming on here, Matt. We are never going to get tired of listening or seeing you. Okay. I can assure you.
And I wore my glasses this time because I wanted to be like you. Usually I wear contacts, but I want to appear like extra smart on this podcast.
Extra smart. All right. That'll do it. Okay. Everybody enjoy your weekend.